By then, the morning had already made its familiar promises. The sun soaked the tidy kitchen in a warm, forgiving gold. The faucet hummed as if it had a job to do beyond rinsing plates. I remember thinking how ordinary the scene was, how this is what faith looks like when you're not at church, just doing the next right thing in a quiet house. My name is Stella Brooks. I live in a neat, middle-class pocket of Phoenix, Arizona, where wind chimes gossip softly and daisies try their best in the dry heat. I'm 65 and widowed 10 years now. The house is full of echoes I've learned to love, and the photographs on the wall do what photographs do. They lie by promising that everyone will always be that happy, that young. My life orbits a small family. My older boy, Stephen, his wife, Arisley, and their little Matthew, 7 years old and already an expert at making his grandmother laugh. My younger son, Ivan, is a pilot. When you raise a boy who dreams of clouds, you learn to measure your days by takeoffs and landings and a mother's quick prayer whispered between them. That morning, Stephen had left early for work, a rolled blueprint under one arm and a stubborn optimism under the other. Matthew had bounded onto the school bus, backpack bobbing like a small boat. From upstairs came Arisley's voice, soft, careful, the way a nurse might address a patient. "Mom, I'm taking a quick shower," she called. "All right, dear," I answered, and the word dear left my mouth the way muscle memory leaves an old violinist's fingers. I was toweling a plate dry when the landline rang. I keep that phone the way some people keep wedding china, because it remembers a version of me I don't want to misplace. I answered, and there he was, Ivan. His voice always comes to me with a lift, like it's riding the slipstream of something lighter than air. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Just checking in. I've got a layover and I thought I'd hear home for a minute." We talk the way a family talks when everyone believes the rest of the day is ordinary. He said the weather over Salt Lake had been generous, the climb smooth. I said the grocery store had overripe peaches that smelled like July even in September. We were both smiling. I know because you can hear a smile in an old-fashioned handset. Then his voice changed. It didn't drop so much as it leaned into a whisper. "Mom," he said, "something strange is happening." Upstairs, the shower ended, the pipes quieted, and I could almost hear Arisley reach for a towel. "What is it?" I asked. I braced my hip on the counter the way you do when you sense that the next sentence will have weight. "I just found a passport near the gate," Ivan said. "Thought I should bring it to the desk, but the name is Arisley. The photo is Arisley, and I just checked the cabin. She's sitting in first class, window seat, France bound." To this day, I remember the sound the house made then. It didn't creak or sigh, it stalled, like a good heart holding its breath. "Ivan," I said gently because you speak softly to a truth you don't want. "That can't be right. She's here in our home, she just told me." "No, Mom." His voice was careful now, a co-pilot guiding a nervous passenger. "I'm looking at her. I'm looking at Arisley right now. It is a particular pain, the one that occurs between what you hear and what you know." I stared at the ceiling as if the drywall might answer back. "Are you sure?" I said, not because I doubted my boy, but because doubt is an old habit of love. Upstairs, a door opened with that polite creak of old wood. "Mom," Arisley called. The voice carried down the staircase, familiar as a favorite sweater. "Who's on the phone?" I admit it, I panicked. "Just a friend," I said into both the receiver and the air. "Be right there." I moved to the living room, closed the door without a click, as if quiet could shield a home from unraveling. "Ivan," I whispered, "she's here. She just finished her shower. I can hear the water still in the pipes." "No, Mom," he said softly, firmly. "I have her passport in my hand. She boarded my flight. The man beside her looks like money, the kind that sits easy and makes eye contact. They were talking close, like people talk who have plans. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with things I had never had to consider. I set the phone down before my hands betrayed me. The room felt suddenly hot, the sunlight a little too insistent. My chest climbed and fell like a mountain range. If you live long enough, grief teaches you a language, not just for funerals, but for moments like this, ordinary minutes that split quietly into a before and an after. You learn to translate, to measure, to ask your own breath to please behave. I opened the living room door. Aracely stood on the staircase, landing in a pale blue house dress, the kind that makes a woman look as if she's trying to belong to a good life. Her hair was still damp, dark against her shoulders. She smiled with practiced softness. "Do you need anything from the market?" she asked. "I'm thinking tomatoes, maybe cilantro for your chili." She was the picture of a person you could trust. I nodded. "Tomatoes would be nice," I said, and felt the sentence wobble. She took the wicker basket, the beige one with a fraying handle, and slipped through the gate with the unhurried posture of the innocent. I watched as the latch clicked. A small sound, but it sliced something anyway. People will tell you that it's the big betrayals that ruin a family. The dramatic affairs, the fist on the table, the slammed door. They forget the delicate treachery of details, a left hand where there should be a right, a handwriting that changes shape as if it too is trying on costumes, a song sung on Tuesday and withheld on Wednesday. Most homes do not break in a single night. They loosen. They give. They cough up little truths and swallow them back until someone finally opens a window. Alone again, I thought of my grandson's notebook, the 2 pages he had shown me the day before, one neat, one not. "Grandma," he'd said, his voice stitched with honest confusion. "Mom writes pretty some days, and then other days it's like she's learning." I had kissed his hair and told him what mothers tell boys who don't yet know how complicated the world is. She was tired, Angel. We're all tired sometimes. I wish tiredness were a sufficient answer. The phone sat on the table, an innocent witness. I wanted to call Ivan back, to ask him if the woman by the window had the same small birthmark under her left ear, a brown fleck like a dot on a map. I wanted him to check if she tugged at her sleeve when she laughed, if she chose the last bite of bread the way Aracely did when she wanted someone to call her generous. But those are not the questions you ask a son at 30,000 feet. And besides, once you start listing tiny proofs, you know you are already asking the larger question. Who is this person in my house? I sat in the old armchair, the one I used to knit, to read bedtime stories, to remember, and let my eyes land on the family photographs. Stephen, too handsome for his own good, on a wedding day where the cake leaned a little and nobody cared. Aracely beside him, bright as the promise everyone thought she was. Ivan in his pilot's uniform, the grin of a boy who'd outrun gravity. And Matthew swaddled, the kind of newborn whose face makes you forget the names of your enemies. The trouble with photographs is how loyal they are to a moment, not to the truth. I rose, moved through the kitchen, and rinsed a coffee mug that didn't need rinsing. Outside, the neighborhood wore its regular mourning. The neighbors' sprinklers flinging rainbows, a jogger counting something only she could hear, a delivery truck with its door rolled up like a grin. It struck me as odd that the world can be so convincingly itself at the exact hour your life becomes less so. If you asked me what I felt, I'd say I felt like a bridge. Bridges are built to be trusted by strangers. They hold weight they didn't choose. They do not get to pick the river. They cannot argue with the wind. Still they stand, even when something beneath them is hurrying away. I suppose the beginning of every hard truth looks like this. You are given 2 realities and asked to pick one. The mind goes with the voice it knows. The heart follows the footsteps it just heard on the stairs. And a mother, God help her, tries to hold both, as if love were a shelf with room to spare. I dried my hands on my apron and told the empty kitchen, "All right," as if a person can agree with the day and tame it. Then I did what the living do in the face of mystery. I waited. For Aracely to return with tomatoes. For Ivan to land in a city I could point to on a map. for the next small proof that would make belief either merciful or impossible. I did not yet know that the truth had already boarded, that it was taxiing, lifting, settling into altitude, that it would arrive on my doorstep wearing a familiar face and an unfamiliar heart. But I knew this. The bridge would have to hold. There are moments when life does not collapse in thunder or fire, but in whispers, glances, and handwriting that shifts from one day to the next. That was how the ground beneath my home began to give way, not with an earthquake, but with a series of hairline cracks too easy to ignore until they spread into a map of suspicion. The morning after Ivan's call, I found myself watching airlessly with a strange kind of hunger. Not hunger for food, but hunger for proof. She stood at the stove, her left hand cradling the skillet, the right sprinkling salt. I thought, she always cooks with her right hand. Always. But when she took up a pen later that day to jot down a shopping list, she switched to her left, her script less certain, looping awkwardly as if the letters were foreign travelers on a road they had not walked before. "Since when do you write with your left?" I asked, my voice light, careful, the way you'd ask about a new perfume. She laughed, a quick, airy thing, a laugh rehearsed in a mirror. "Just practicing, Mom. Keeps the brain sharp." I smiled, though something inside me wilted. Practicing. We practice piano, recipes, English verbs, not the hand we were born to favor. The thing about doubt is this. Once it enters a house, it finds new rooms to live in. That evening, as I set the table, Matthew scampered over with his notebook, eyes glowing the way only a child's can. "Grandma, look. Yesterday Mom helped me with homework. See, pretty letters." He flipped to the next page. "But today," his finger traced clumsy strokes, uneven and bent. "She said I should finish on my own." I kissed his hair, the soft down of it smelling faintly of crayons and the playground sun. "She was tired, Angel," I whispered. Even mothers get tired. But I could not unsee the 2 pages, one neat as Sunday church, the other ragged as a torn hymn. Later, our neighbor Mrs. Collins dropped by with a dish. She's the kind of woman who sees everything while pretending she sees nothing. "Your daughter-in-law handed me this yesterday," she said. "Funny, she gave it with her left hand. Didn't you once say she's right-handed?" I offered tea, changed the subject, but my heart added another tick to the ledger. A ledger I hadn't meant to keep. By nightfall, the ledger was heavy. I sat in my armchair, notebook on my lap, and for the first time, I wrote things down, not grocery lists or prayer requests, but observations. 3 p.m., Arisley leaves for market with red basket. 6 p.m., returns with blue basket. Claimed old one broke. My handwriting shook, each word a nail in the coffin of the family I thought I knew. It felt like betrayal, recording the movements of someone I once called daughter. But if you've ever been a mother, you know there comes a moment when love must make room for truth. You cannot protect what you refuse to see. Outside, the desert sun lowered itself into the horizon, casting stripes of orange through the curtains. I thought of Ivan's words again. "She's on my flight. I see her with my own eyes." And then I thought of the woman upstairs brushing her hair, humming softly, as if she were just another thread in the ordinary fabric of our lives. The question that had begun as a whisper was now lodged in me like a stone. Was my daughter-in-law one woman or 2? And if there were 2, which one was I breaking bread with at my table? If love is a quilt, then doubt is the seam ripper. It doesn't shred the fabric all at once. It teases threads loose until the whole thing threatens to fall apart. That is what I felt as I kept writing in the notebook I had never intended to keep. Each line seemed to pull another string from the life I thought I understood. It began innocently enough. Times, gestures, fragments. Tuesday, she hummed while cooking. Sweet, patient. Wednesday, sharp words for Matthew, no reason at all. I wrote in a shaky hand, as if naming the moments might bring clarity. But clarity is a cruel friend. It never comes without a cost. That Friday, Stephen came home later than usual. He kissed Matthew on the head, left his blueprints in a pile, and washed his hands the way a man does when he wants to wash away more than ink and sweat. At dinner, he told us about deadlines and contracts. Arisley listened politely, her smile a shade too thin, her eyes elsewhere. I looked at her fingers. She stirred soup with her left hand, then passed bread with her right. Perhaps no one else noticed. But once you start watching, you cannot stop. Later that night, when Stephen and Matthew had gone to bed, I stayed up in the kitchen. I watched Arisley sit at the table, a notebook of her own in front of her. She picked up a pen with her left hand. Stephen, half asleep, teased her gently. "Since when do you write like that?" Her smile froze, then returned too quickly. "Oh, just experimenting." She shut the notebook as if it held state secrets. I said nothing, but my pulse quickened, because sometimes silence is the only way to hear what isn't being said. The next morning, I walked down the cobblestone street to return a spice jar to Mrs. Collins. She brewed coffee and pulled me into her kitchen. Her words carried that careful weight neighbors use when speaking about family. "Stella, has your daughter-in-law changed?" Some days she greets me kindly, other days she walks past as if I were a stranger. Her voice was kind, but her eyes were sharp. She was not gossiping, she was observing, and her observations matched mine. By the time I reached home, I was trembling. I poured tea and tried to calm myself. But the truth has a way of spreading like ink in water. It colors everything. That afternoon at the bakery, Mr. Johnson leaned on the counter and said, "Your son's wife, she's a funny one. Last week she complimented my bread as if it were the best she'd ever had. This morning she barely looked at me, just took the bag and left." I smiled faintly, paid for the bread and left, but his words were another stone on the growing pile. When I got home, Arisley returned from the market. She wore a navy blouse, though she had left in a white one. "Got a stain," she said quickly when I asked. She didn't wait for my reply. She slipped into the kitchen as if she belonged there, and maybe she did, but something inside me screamed otherwise. That night I opened my notebook again. The ink bled a little on the paper, heavy from the pressure of my hand. Changed blouse between leaving and returning. Voice different. Cold. Neighbor noticed. Baker noticed. Not just me. I closed the notebook, placed my hand on the cover as if to bless it. Then I whispered into the empty kitchen, "I don't know who you are anymore." And that is the loneliness of doubt. It makes you a stranger in your own home. The truth rarely announces itself. It does not knock politely or wait for an invitation. More often, it hides in plain sight, waiting for the one moment when you're willing to follow your suspicion past the edge of comfort. For me, that moment came on a Saturday morning, when Arisley left the house with her usual wicker basket and the same words she always used. "Mom, I'm going to the market." I had heard that sentence 100 times, but this time, something in me refused to stay behind. I slipped my shawl around my shoulders, pulled the door quietly closed, and walked far enough behind her that the distance might protect me, though in truth nothing could. The Arizona sun was already pressing down hard, flattening the world into a shimmer of heat. I watched her familiar silhouette moving down the cobblestone street. She walked with the confidence of someone who knows she is being trusted. But then she reached the corner, where the market waited to the right, and she turned left. I stopped. My heart stuttered. That small turn felt larger than continents shifting. I followed, every step a betrayal of the woman I once called daughter. The air smelled of grease and metal. Children played barefoot in narrow yards where laundry flapped like exhausted flags. This was not the place for our market trips. It was a neighborhood that carried the weariness of working men and the thin laughter of women who counted every dollar twice. Arisley, or the woman I believed to be her, walked quickly, slipping into an alley so narrow it seemed made for secrets. I hid behind a mechanic's shop where a man was bent over an engine, his wrench clanging like a church bell marking the hour. From my hiding place, I saw her knock on a weathered wooden door. She glanced over her shoulder once, then disappeared inside. The door closed, leaving me staring at peeling paint and a pot of wilted daisies on the window ledge. I wanted to walk up, to pound on that door and demand an answer. But my legs would not obey. Fear has a way of pinning even the strongest of us to the ground. I turned and walked back home, each step heavier, as though I carried a burden no one else could see. And when I opened the gate, I froze. There she was airlessly standing in the kitchen in a white blouse, her hands busy chopping vegetables. Her hair tied back, her expression cool. She looked at me with eyes sharp as glass. "Where did you go, Mom?" she asked. "You're just getting back now." I swallowed hard. "Just out for a walk," I whispered, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. She nodded, nothing more. But her gaze lingered too long, as though she knew something I didn't. I climbed the stairs to my room, shut the door, and leaned against it, trembling. I pressed my palms flat to the wood as if it could keep me steady. Minutes earlier, I had watched her disappear into that alley in a yellow dress. Now she was here, in a white blouse, as if she had never left. How do you argue with what you see? How do you reconcile two truths that cancel each other out? That night Matthew came to me, his little face streaked with tears. "Grandma," he sobbed, "Mom yelled at me for dropping a pencil. Yesterday she hugged me. Today she wouldn't even look at me. I want the mom from yesterday." I held him close, his small heart pounding against my chest. Tears burned in my eyes. I wanted to tell him I did too, that I, too, longed for the gentle woman who sang lullabies and wiped his tears. But instead I whispered, "She's tired, sweetheart. Don't be sad." But in truth, sadness was all I had left. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind circling the same terrible thought. Perhaps these were not the moods of one woman. Perhaps I was living with two. Morning light in Phoenix is merciless. It pours through curtains, burns through excuses, and exposes every wrinkle, every crack, every unfinished prayer. That Sunday, it found me at my kitchen table, my old notebook open, pen trembling in my hand. I wrote the sentence I had been too afraid to write. Maybe she is not the same person. The words stared back at me like a verdict. Once written, they could not be erased. I decided then I could not live in questions anymore. I needed answers. With a photograph of Arisley tucked into my purse, I returned to that narrow alley, my feet dragging but determined. The houses leaned against one another like tired men at a bus stop. Paint peeled, metal roofs groaned, and from behind doors came the sounds of radios, coughs, and cooking oil snapping in pans. I stopped in front of the same weathered door I had seen her enter. Number 14. The pot of daisies on the window was more wilted than before, petals curling inward as if they too were hiding something. I knocked. My hand trembled. The sound of it echoed like a gavel. The door opened and I gasped. Standing before me was a woman identical to Arisley. Same long dark hair, same oval face, same wary eyes. For a moment, I thought the world had finally broken me, that I was staring at my own madness. Her hand clutched a rag, knuckles white. I'm sorry," she stammered, trying to close the door. Before I could speak, another voice called from inside. Calm, steady, the voice of someone unafraid. "Isadora, don't hide. She deserves to know." A second woman stepped forward, thinner, hair in a bun, eyes intelligent but kind. She smiled faintly. "Mrs. Brooks, my name is Lucy. Please come in. It's time you learn the truth." I stepped inside, though my legs wobbled like an old bridge in the wind. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and onions. An old man lay coughing on a cot in the corner, his frame covered by a frayed blanket. The walls bore stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Poverty lived here, not as a guest, but as the owner. The young woman who looked like Arisley kept her gaze on the floor. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, I'm not Arisley. My name is Isadora." I gripped the back of a wooden chair to steady myself. Then why, I asked, my voice cracking, why do you look exactly like my daughter-in-law? Why have you been in my house? Tears filled her eyes and she shook her head. I never meant to hurt anyone. She found me years ago at the market. She said we looked alike, like sisters. She offered me money if I would stand in for her sometimes. Just a few hours. Oh, she said, pretend to shop, pretend to cook, pretend to be her. My parents are sick and we needed medicine. I said yes. Her hands twisted the rag until I thought it might tear. I looked at Lucy, who nodded solemnly. She's telling the truth, Mrs. Brooks. I've seen it. Errolsley uses her. Sends her to your house when she wants to disappear. I've even heard the name of the man she disappears with, Charles Thompson. Wealthy. Elegant. She calls him honey. My breath caught. Ivan's voice replayed in my mind. She's sitting in first class next to a man who looks rich. They were talking like a couple. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered for months, suddenly aligned. The handwriting, the mood swings, the shirts and baskets that changed without reason. My knees went weak and I sank into the chair. Isidora's sobs broke the silence. I only did it to buy medicine. I swear I don't know what she does when I take her place. Please believe me. I studied her face, identical yet different. Where Errolsley's smile had become practiced, Isidora's trembled with honesty, and in that moment, I knew she was no mastermind. She was a pawn in a game she never asked to play. The room swirled with questions, but one settled like a stone in my chest. If Errolsley could deceive us with such cruelty, what else had she hidden? I reached across the table, placed my trembling hand over Isidora's, and spoke words I didn't know I carried. From today on, no one will use you again, but you must help me. We have to bring the truth into the light. For Stephen, for Matthew, for all of us. Her tears fell onto my hand, warm and heavy. She nodded. I will help you. And though my heart was breaking, I felt the first flicker of something I had not felt in months. Not peace, not relief, but hope. Hope, when it comes, does not erase fear. It lives beside it like two uneasy neighbors who cannot agree on where the fence should stand. That night, I returned home with Isidora's face etched in my mind, so much like Errolsley's, yet softened by sorrow instead of calculation. I lay awake, the desert wind rattling the windows, and I thought, resemblance that perfect cannot be an accident. The next morning, I returned to number 14. The old man was coughing more harshly now, each breath a struggle, and a frail woman lay beside him, her hair completely white. Lucy whispered, "This is Mrs. Jones, Isidora's adoptive mother." I took the woman's hand, thin, trembling, the skin translucent like old paper. She turned her cloudy eyes toward me. "You're Stephen's mother," she rasped. "Yes," I answered softly. "And you raised Isidora." She nodded, her breath shallow. "I was a nurse many years ago. There was a poor family at the hospital. They had twins, 2 baby girls. The parents wept because they could only afford to keep one. They said they'd abandon the other. I couldn't bear it, so I took her. I took Isidora, raised her as my own." Her words struck me like thunder rolling across an empty plain. Twins. 2 girls born on the same day, one raised in light, the other in shadows. My heart hammered. "Do you know the other child's name?" I asked, though my voice shook as if already fearing the answer. Mrs. Jones closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her temple. "I don't know, I never asked. I only wanted to save the one I could." I felt the room tilt. My breath came short. Slowly, I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded wedding certificate I had once seen, where Errolsley's birth date was printed. With trembling hands, I unfolded the yellowing hospital papers Mrs. Jones handed me for Isidora. The dates matched. Exact. I looked at Isidora. She sat hunched, her face in her palms, her body trembling with sobs. "So she's my sister," she whispered. "Errolsley is my twin." Her voice broke on the word twin, as if the very sound of it carried both a wound and a wish. I could not hold back my own tears. I thought of every Sunday meal, every birthday candle, every photograph where I believed Errolsley to be a blessing to our family. And now I saw her in a crueler light, not only as a wife who betrayed her husband, not only as a mother who confused her child, but as a sister who exploited her own blood. I placed my hand on Isidora's shoulder. "You are not her shadow," I told her. "You are not her mistake. You are a daughter, and from today you are family." Her eyes lifted to mine, red and swollen, yet filled with something fragile, something like relief. In that small, suffocating room, truth had taken root. And though it tore through me like a storm, I could hear my late husband's voice, calm and steady, the way he used to say it when life pressed too hard. "The truth will set you free, Stella. It always does." I left number 14 carrying papers in my bag, a secret in my chest, and a decision in my heart. The truth had to be brought to the table. No more whispers, no more shadows. For Stephen, for Matthew, for the family that deserved light after so much darkness. The silence that follows betrayal is unlike any other silence. It is not peaceful. It does not heal. It lingers in the corners of rooms like smoke after a fire, thin, choking, impossible to ignore. That was the silence that settled over my home after Arisley slammed the door and walked out of our lives. Stephen sat at the table long after the plates had gone cold. His hands, once steady enough to draft entire buildings, now trembled as he traced invisible lines across the tablecloth. 11 years, he whispered, as if speaking to himself. 11 years, and she walked away as if none of it mattered. Ivan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, a gesture both firm and fragile. "She made her choice, Stephen, but you still have us. You still have Matthew." Matthew, my sweet boy, had cried himself to sleep against my chest. I carried him to his bed, his small fingers still curled around my shawl, as though holding on to me might keep the world from shifting again. Before closing his door, I heard him murmur, "Grandma, I don't want the mean mom to come back." My heart broke at the innocence of it, the way children can name truths adults dance around. The days that followed felt hollow. Arisley filed for divorce swiftly, coldly, as though paperwork could erase promises. She did not ask for custody. Not once did she call for Matthew. It was as if motherhood had been a costume she was tired of wearing. Stephen returned from the courthouse pale and wordless. He handed me the documents with a trembling hand. "She didn't even look at me, Mom, or at Matthew." She signed and left. He sat heavily in the armchair, shoulders bent under the weight of abandonment. For the first time since Raphael's death, I saw in my son's eyes the same hollow grief his father had carried when the doctor gave us the news that time was short. And yet, even in grief, small mercies arrive. Isidora began to visit more often. She brought soup in chipped containers, played board games with Matthew, and knelt to tie his shoelaces with a gentleness that needed no rehearsal. He began calling her auntie at first, but one evening, while coloring at the table, he looked up and said, "Mom, will you draw a bird for me?" The word slipped out naturally, without hesitation, and though Isidora's eyes filled with tears, she did not correct him. Stephen noticed too. He watched her one evening as she sang the lullaby I once sang to my boys, Cielito Lindo, her voice carrying the tune like a ribbon through the house. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. It was small, almost embarrassed, but it was there. One night, while clearing dishes, Stephen lingered by the sink. His voice was quiet, almost as if he were confessing. "She brings light back into this house, Mom. After everything, I didn't think it was possible." He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "Do you think is it too soon to hope again?" I thought of Raphael, of his steady wisdom, of how he used to tell me that storms may strip a tree bare, but they cannot kill its roots. "Hope is never too soon," I told my son. "It's what keeps us standing when everything else falls." Weeks passed, and the silence in our home shifted. It was no longer heavy with betrayal, but softened by laughter. Matthew's giggles at Isidora's silly faces, Ivan's teasing about her clumsy cooking, even Stephen's chuckles at her playful scolding. Slowly, the wounds began to stitch themselves closed, not by forgetting, but by choosing to love again. One evening, as twilight painted the sky lavender, Stephen walked into the living room holding a small velvet box. His hands shook, but his eyes held something steady. He knelt in front of Isadora, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to waste any more time," he said. "You brought light back to me and to Matthew. Will you be my wife? Will you be Matthew's mom?" The room stilled. Isadora covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. She looked at me as if asking permission. I nodded through my own tears. "You've already been part of this family," I said softly. "Now let it be official." Isadora whispered yes, her voice breaking, and Matthew clapped his hands, shouting, "I knew it." That night, the silence in our home finally broke, not with grief, but with joy. For the first time in months, I sat on the porch, listening to the desert wind carry laughter through the house. And I thought, perhaps storms don't come to destroy. Perhaps they come to clear the ground so something truer can be built. The wedding was nothing like the one Stephen had once promised heiressly. There were no grand halls, no polished silver, no orchestra tucked away in a corner. Instead, it was held in our own backyard, under the same mesquite tree that had shaded Matthew's first birthday party and 100 quiet Sunday afternoons. We strung lights across the fence, tied roses to the chairs, and borrowed tables from neighbors who wanted to help. It wasn't lavish, but it was honest, and after all the lies that had invaded our home, honesty felt like the greatest luxury. Stephen stood tall in his simple suit, his tie slightly crooked. Matthew's eager fingers had insisted on helping. Ivan flew home that morning, his uniform crisp, his smile brighter than the desert sun. He wrapped his arms around his brother and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw the way Stephen's shoulders eased, as if years of weight had slipped off. And then there was Isadora. She wore a plain white dress, nothing extravagant, but her joy lit her more than any jewels could. Her hands trembled when she reached for Stephen's, and for a moment I saw not just a bride, but a woman finally stepping into a life that had always been denied her. When they exchanged vows, there were no grand speeches, only words that came from scarred but willing hearts. "I promise," Stephen said, his voice steady though his eyes glistened, "to honor the light you've brought into my life, and to be the father Matthew deserves with you by my side." Isadora's reply was soft, but every word carried the strength of survival. "I promise to love without pretending, to stay without disappearing, to build not just a home but a family that knows truth." Matthew, dressed as his father's tiny best man, giggled through the ceremony. At one point, he tugged Isadora's dress and whispered, loud enough for all to hear, "Don't forget to sing my lullaby tonight, Mom." The crowd laughed gently, but my tears flowed freely. Out of the mouths of children comes the purest truth. When the vows ended, the applause rose, not polite but heartfelt, as if the entire neighborhood had chosen to bless this fragile, hard-won love. Ivan lifted Matthew onto his shoulders, and the boy waved a small bouquet like a victory flag. I sat in the front row, my heart swelling with a strange mix of grief and gratitude. Grief for what was lost, the years Stephen had given to someone who never cherished them. Gratitude for what was found, the chance to rebuild with someone who loved not out of duty or pretense, but out of choice. Later that evening, as lanterns glowed and the air filled with the smell of roasted meat and bread, I thought of Raphael. My late husband would have loved this scene. The music of laughter, the sight of our sons standing shoulder to shoulder, the warmth of family reborn. I imagined his voice beside me, calm as always. "See, Stella, even broken families can bloom again." And as I watched Stephen twirl Isadora under the lights, Matthew clapping in rhythm, Ivan raising a toast, I knew he was right. Some vows are not broken. They are simply rewritten, stronger for the pain that came before. Happiness, when it returns, does not arrive like a parade. It slips in quietly, like dawn light through old curtains, illuminating corners you thought would always stay dark. That is how life felt in the weeks after Stephen and Isidora's wedding. Our home was still the same, a modest Phoenix house with faded photographs on the walls, but the air was different. It carried laughter again, the kind that rises naturally without apology. Every evening I would watch the three of them together. Stephen, still weary from work, would sit at the table with his blueprints, pencil smudges on his fingers. Beside him, Isidora would serve tea, her touch gentle as she set the cup down, leaning in to listen as he described beams and arches. She had no training in architecture, but her eyes shone with pride, as if each line he drew were a masterpiece. Matthew thrived in the presence of a love that no longer shifted like sand. He no longer flinched at dinner, waiting for a sharp word. He no longer whispered to me about the mean mom. Instead, he would run to Isidora after school, backpack bouncing, eager to show her his drawings. One afternoon, he thrust a page into her hands, a crooked little house with 4 smiling stick figures. "That's us," he said proudly. "Me, Dad, Grandma, and you, Mom." Isidora's eyes brimmed with tears. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "That's the most beautiful house I've ever seen." It wasn't just Matthew who healed. Stephen, though scarred, began to soften too. He still carried silence around like a coat, but there were moments when it slipped. One evening, I caught him watching Isidora as she braided Matthew's hair for a school project. His expression was tender, almost astonished, as if he couldn't believe this second chance had truly come. Later that night, he told me quietly, "Mom, I thought the storm would break me, but maybe it just cleared the ground for something better." Our neighbors noticed the change. Mrs. Collins came by with a pie, smiling knowingly. "Your family feels lighter now, Stella, like the sun came back to your porch." Even Mr. Johnson at the bakery remarked how Matthew's laughter was different, fuller. These small confirmations reminded me that love is not only felt inside a home. It radiates outward, shaping the way others see you too. And yet, even amid peace, memory lingers. Some nights, I would wake with the sound of that slammed door echoing in my ears, the image of Arisley's cold smile haunting me. I wondered where she was, if Charles Thompson still whispered promises to her, if she ever thought of the boy she left behind. But I would rise, check on Matthew, hear his steady breathing beside Isidora's soft lullaby, and I knew those questions no longer held power. One evening, as twilight settled over the yard, I sat on the porch with my knitting. Inside, Stephen worked on blueprints, Isidora prepared tea, and Matthew chattered about dinosaurs. Through the window, I saw a scene so ordinary it became holy. And I thought of Raphael, gone a decade now, and how he used to tell me, "The measure of a house is not its walls, but the love it holds." Our walls were the same, but the love inside them had changed, rebuilt stronger than before. That night, as I closed my notebook, the one that once held suspicions and fears, I wrote a single line on the last page, "Truth broke us, but love built us again." Time does not heal with grand gestures. It heals in fragments, in ordinary afternoons, in the quiet routines that become anchors again. That was how our lives slowly stitched themselves back together after the storm. Stephen worked longer hours, but he no longer carried his exhaustion like a shield. He came home, loosened his tie, and bent down to kiss Matthew before washing up for dinner. He shared small stories from the office, nothing remarkable, but each word a sign that he was learning to live again. Isidora filled the house with her gentle constancy. She sang while cooking, humming soft tunes that reminded me of my own youth. Sometimes, without realizing it, she slipped into Si Lido Lindo, the lullaby I once sang to my boys, and hearing it spill from her lips felt like a thread tying generations together. It was as if Raphael, long gone, was still here, nodding in approval. Matthew blossomed most of all. The shadows that had once haunted his little face began to fade. He laughed more easily, played more boldly, even slept more soundly. He no longer asked, "Which mom will I get today?" Instead, he climbed into Isidora's lap, certain of the love that awaited him there. One evening, he whispered to her, "Thank you for staying." She kissed the top of his head and whispered back, "I'll always stay." Even Ivan, ever the wanderer of skies, found himself drawn home more often. During his layovers, he would stop by, uniform still crisp, eyes tired but warm. He'd toss Matthew in the air, tease Isadora about her cooking, and sit with Stephen late into the night, talking like brothers who had rediscovered the need for each other. And me, I watched it all with the ache of someone who has walked through fire and lived to see the garden regrow. I still kept the notebook tucked away in a drawer. Its pages held months of doubt, sorrow, and discovery. Sometimes I opened it, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself how far we had come. Each line of suspicion was a seed, and though they had grown into thorns, they had also cleared space for something new to bloom. One evening, while folding laundry, I found Stephen standing at the window, staring at the stars. "Do you ever wonder where she is?" he asked softly. I knew who he meant. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, but wondering won't change her choices. She walked away, Stephen, and sometimes the greatest mercy we can give ourselves is to let people stay gone." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening, then loosening. "You're right, Mom. I don't want Matthew to ever feel abandoned again." I looked at him, the boy I raised, the man carrying scars, and I said what every mother longs to say. "He won't, because he still has us. He still has you, and he has Isadora, who has already proven she knows how to stay." That night, as I closed the curtains and turned off the lights, I felt something shift. Our family was not the same as it had been before. It was smaller, yes, but also steadier. We had been broken, but we were no longer brittle. Sometimes, healing doesn't mean forgetting the fracture. It means learning to live in a house where the cracks are visible but no longer threatening to bring the whole thing down. And in those cracks, strangely, light can enter. By the time autumn settled in, the house had learned to breathe again. The days were not perfect. Life never is, but they carried a rhythm, a steadiness that had once felt impossible. In the mornings, I would sit on the porch with my coffee, watching Matthew run circles around the yard, while Isadora reminded him not to trip over his shoelaces. Stephen would leave for work with his briefcase and a softer expression, one that told me he wasn't carrying grief like armor anymore. And in those small moments, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Sometimes I caught myself listening for the sound of the old life, the slammed doors, the whispered suspicions, the weight of uncertainty. But instead, I heard laughter, the clink of dishes, the hum of lullabies, and I realized that the absence of chaos is its own kind of blessing. Neighbors noticed the change, too. Mrs. Collins smiled more when she visited, as if our peace had spilled across the fence. Mr. Johnson at the bakery slipped an extra pastry into Matthew's bag and said, "He looks happier these days, stronger." Their words reminded me that healing is never private. It radiates outward, the way the desert sun warms everything it touches. And yet, memory never leaves entirely. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered about Arisley, where she had gone, whether Charles Thompson still whispered false promises into her ear, whether she ever thought of the boy she abandoned. But those thoughts no longer held me hostage. They passed like passing clouds, noticed, then gone. What remained was gratitude. Gratitude for Stephen's resilience, for Ivan's steady loyalty, for Matthew's forgiving heart, and for the unexpected gift of Isadora. She had entered our lives through deception, through a cruel arrangement born of desperation. Yet she stayed by choice, not out of duty or convenience, but out of love. That love had rebuilt what was broken. One evening after dinner, Matthew climbed onto my lap, his arms wrapping around my neck. "Grandma," he whispered, "thank you for keeping us together." His words, innocent and unpolished, pierced me more deeply than any sermon or poem. I kissed his forehead and held him tight. "Families don't stay together because they never break, sweetheart. They stay together because someone chooses to mend them." Later that night, when the house was quiet, I took out my old notebook, the one filled with suspicions, notes, and heartbreak. I turned to the last page and added one more line. The truth did not ruin us, it saved us. I closed the book, placed it gently in the drawer, and let out a long, steady breath. For the first time in years, I felt free. And as I sat by the window, listening to the night wind sweep across the desert, I thought of Raphael's old words. "The truth will set you free, Stella." He was right. It had. And freedom, I realized, is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of love after pain has had its say. By winter, the air in Phoenix had cooled, carrying with it the scent of orange blossoms and the rustle of dry leaves across our yard. Life inside our home had settled into a kind of rhythm that felt both new and familiar, like an old song sung in a different key. Stephen worked steadily, but he no longer drowned in it. He came home earlier, eager for dinners where laughter spilled over bowls of chili and stories of Matthew's school day filled the space. Sometimes I caught him watching Isadora with a look I recognized from his younger years, a gaze full of wonder, as if he couldn't believe he was allowed a second chance. Ivan remained our anchor in the skies, flying routes that stitched continents together. And yet, he never missed a chance to call. "Mom," he'd say through the static of long-distance lines, "tell Matthew I'll bring him a toy plane next time." His voice was a reminder that even those who live above the clouds can be rooted deeply in family. As for Isadora, she slipped into our lives not as an intruder anymore, but as a cornerstone. She learned our rhythms, honored our traditions, and began to create new ones. On Sundays, she baked bread that filled the house with warmth, and in the evenings, she sat with Matthew to teach him songs her adoptive mother once sang. Songs stitched with both sorrow and resilience, but now transformed into lullabies of love. And me, I often found myself reflecting in quiet moments. I would sit in the garden with my knitting, watching the daisies push stubbornly through the dry soil. They reminded me of our family, delicate yet unyielding. I realized that grief does not vanish, it transforms. It becomes part of the soil from which something new can grow. Sometimes I still thought of Arisley, where she might be if her wealth had bought her happiness, if she ever lay awake regretting the child she left behind. But those thoughts no longer poisoned me. They came and went like passing shadows. What mattered was the light that remained. One evening, while the house buzzed with chatter, Matthew pulled me aside. His small hand slipped into mine. "Grandma," he said with that innocent earnestness only a child carries, "can families grow new hearts?" I knelt down, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, families can break, but they can also grow new hearts, and those hearts can beat even stronger." He smiled, satisfied, and ran back to show Isadora his latest drawing, a house with a garden, 4 figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. I lingered in that moment, letting it settle deep into me. Because what remains after betrayal, after loss, after storms, is not just pain. It is the possibility of building again, of finding love where you least expect it, of choosing truth even when it hurts. And in that choice, families are remade. Not perfect, not untouched, but real. In the end, what do we carry forward? Not the lies, not the betrayals, not even the faces of those who walked away. What we carry is the proof that love, tested, scarred, but still standing, can outlast storms. My home today is not the same home it once was. Its walls hold stories of doubt, of tears, of nights when I thought the weight of truth would crush me. But those same walls now echo with laughter, with lullabies, with the clink of dishes passed around a table where no one has to pretend anymore. Stephen has found a partner who stays. Matthew has found the mother he deserves. Ivan has learned that even in the skies, his roots are here. And I have learned that age does not mean we stop growing. It means we finally understand what matters most. Truth did not destroy us. It remade us. And in its wake, I discovered that families are not measured by who shares our blood, but by who chooses to stay, to love, and to build again when everything has fallen apart. So I leave you with this. If your family is in turmoil, if lies have stolen your peace, do not fear the truth. Yes, it may break you open. But sometimes, it is only through the breaking that we can see what is worth keeping and what is worth letting go. And to you, dear listener, thank you for walking with me through this story. Your time is precious, and I am grateful you shared it here. May you and your loved ones find the strength to face truth, the grace to forgive, and the courage to rebuild. Until we meet again, may your days be blessed with health, your homes filled with peace, and your families wrapped in love. Thank you, and take care of one another.